Hello, this is Ankit Reddy. Welcome to the .NET course from educators.com, world's best online training tutorial for the leading technologies. In this video, we learn about ADO.NET Connection Object, creating an SQL connection object, how to use SQL connection object, why to close a database connection, and how to close a connection. These are the things we are going to discuss in this video session. In the previous session, we have had an introduction to ADO.NET. We also understood about the different .NET data providers. The key to understand ADO.NET is to understand the first and foremost thing is connection, next is command, data reader, data adapter, data set. These 5 things are very much important to understand this ADO.NET. The first thing is connection object. If we understand how to work with one database, then we should be able to easily work with any other databases. All we have to do is change the provider specific string. Suppose if you are using SQL, it will be there SQL connection. If you are using Oracle, there it will be changed to Oracle connection, like so, OLEDB and ODBC. So in the next few sessions of this video, we'll be discussing about command, data reader, data adapter, and data set. In this video session, we'll be discussing about SQL connection object. The concepts that we discuss here are applicable to all the .NET data providers. The first thing what we will have to do is, whenever we are working with the database, is to create a connection object. There are two ways to create an instance of SQL connection class. I'll show you that how to create. Let's flip to the Visual Studio and let me go to the view code here. I told you that in the previous session, in order to use ADO.NET, we should use a namespace called using system.data. Then see here what I'm doing. SQL connection. Let me write here. SQL connection. Still it is not coming. Why? Because we are going to use this SQL client here. So we need to use one more namespace that is called that SQL client. Until unless you don't use this namespace, you cannot get SQL connection or anything, whatever it is. This is a class. So you just mouse over on it, it will be showing here. The first word it is class. Now I'm going to create an object for this SQL connection class is equals to new SQL connection, inside which, let me take one more thing. I told you, right, two things are there to create an object for this SQL connection. Connection 1 and let me give connection 2. Okay, now the parameters what we are passing is a different, those are called different ways. How it will be different is depending on the SQL server, how you are going to connect. There are two ways we can always connect to the database. One is Windows authentication, other one is SQL server authentication. When you go to this SQL server management studio, we click on this connect to object explorer, you can see here authentication type as Windows authentication. When you select this Windows authentication, you no need to pass username and password. While you are connecting to the database, how you are connecting, that is most important. Depending on that, we should be using the respective method. If you are using Windows authentication like this, you no need to pass username and password. If you are using SQL Server authentication, you should pass username and password like login and password here to connect this SQL Server. Same way, we have two methods here. One is without username and password and the other one is with username and password. Let me explain it what I'm going to tell here. Data source is equals to, here if you go back, server name, just bring this, copy, not copy, otherwise, and then here source equals to, please keep two backward slashes, otherwise it will be giving error. Then after this data source will be giving database name. which is equal to what is the database name we wanted to connect. I wanted to connect to the educators database. So let me copy that. Then educators. Make sure that there are no spelling mistakes. So better you rename it and get the copy. It's not coming. Let me take it again. Yeah, now it will come. I'm going to paste here. Educators. This is the database name. Then we need to use integrated security if we are using this Windows authentication SSPI. Okay, this is how we'll be connecting to the database which is having Windows authentication for your SQL connection. Understand? Suppose if you are having SQL Server authentication, what to do? The same thing will be there. Data source will be same and database will be same, but user ID will come and password will come. So let me take this entire thing, copy, then let me paste it. Till here same, data source and database is same, but instead of this integrated security, you will be getting user ID is equals to whatever the user ID you have using, your user ID. Then password. Whatever the password you are having, you can use that password. It is equal to my password. Like this. So it depends on you how you are connecting to the database. Here, go to the SSMS. SSMS means SQL Server Management Studio. If you are connecting to your SQL Server like this, then you don't need to pass username and password. If you are connecting to your SQL Server by using this method, SQL Server authentication, you will be passing login and password. Same manner you need to follow here also. So for both the methods, data source and database is common. Then user ID and password will be for SQL Server authentication and integrated security for Windows authentication. The data source is the name or IP address sometimes. Here either it is a server name or IP address. If your database is located in a server, then we'll be giving IP address that we wanted to connect to. If you are working with a local instance of SQL Server, you can just specify a dot as well. So if you are having this server name, you please paste here and then you can connect it to that one. Sometimes if the server is on a network, then use the name or IP address. Instead of this place, we'll be using IP address for this data source. Sample ADO.NET code that create a connection, and the created connection object is then passed to the command object. Then execute that command, then displays the data. Remember that connection should be opened as late as possible and should be closed as early as possible. Remember that connection should be opened as late as possible and should be closed as early as possible. Now let us take a sample example to display some data. I am using the first type of connection because I am having Windows authentication, not a SQL Server authentication. So let me put comments for the second option, so that let me use this connection only. Now I wanted to display something in a page by getting to the data from SQL database. Now SQL command, do not worry about SQL command, I will explain it again when we are explaining about this SQL command class in the coming up the session. com is equals to new SQL command, inside which I wanted to display some data from SQL Server main system. I have a table students. Let us see that whether the data is there or not in this table. Yeah, we have a table and we have some data also. I wanted to display this data from SQL Server to our ASP.NET application. For that, here simply I am writing a query. Select star from TBL underscore students. Make sure that this table name is matching here, TBL students. Otherwise, you will be getting errors. TBL students. Now, what to do? I'm going to use a try block. Then it is not ready here. Finally, to make this alignment properly, you please select with Control A, then Control K, then Control D. Control K, Control D. It's not working. Okay, leave it for some time. Let it write something inside this try, and then we'll see that. Let me bring this line to this try block, and we wanted to tell this SQL command on which I wanted to execute this. I wanted to execute this command on a connection, this one. Then open the connection. I told you, right? As late as possible you open the connection, as early as possible you close the connection once the work is done. Now just before executing this, I'm going to open this connection. Now I wanted to display this data in a grid view. For that, let me drag and drop a grid view onto the page. The grid view will be there in a data section. Here you can see this grid view. You can auto format always if you wanted to have a colorful, whatever it is. These are the styles which are available. You can choose it. Let me take a professional. Click on OK. Now let me go back to this place. Now grid view 1 dot data source is equals to com dot execute reader. Do not worry about this method. Again, I will be explaining about when we are discussing about SQL command. I will explain about this execute reader. This session is about how to use this connection object. By using this connection object, I am going to retrieve some data from the database. Now finally, we wanted to go into the binding this method to this grid view. Finally, class is there to close connections. Connections dot close. Now let us Control A, Control A and D. Now this got formatted easily. Understand? So what I did, just see this again. In a page load event, I have created SQL connection. In order to get this SQL connection class, you should use this SQL client namespace. Otherwise, you will not be getting. Then inside which I am passing the parameters, because I am having this Windows authentication. It is enough to pass integrated security SQL SSPI. Otherwise, it is not required to have this username and password. When do you use username and password is when you are connecting to the database. It is required to provide here also user ID and password. As of now, I am not going to use this SQL Server authentication, so I used this one without user ID and password. And what I did in a try command, in try block, SQL command, select star from TBL students, and then I am using this connection object. I am passing this connection because please execute this command for this connection, and connection dot open grid view under data source, and then we have this command dot execute reader. This execute reader will be used to fetch the more than one record. Don't worry about this execute reader method. I will be explaining again SQL command when we are discussing about separate session. This is how it will be there. The finally block will get executed irrespective of the try block get error or not. So only the best place to close a connection is always a finally block. Close the connection in the finally block. Connections are limited and are very valuable. Connections must be closed properly for better performance and scalability. So if you don't close the connections properly, the performance will be degraded. Now let us build this application. Then We'll debug this. Let us see, we'll be getting data or not. Yes, we have got the data. How we have got? The same data. Student ID, F name, L name, location, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Ankit Reddy, India, Ankit Reddy, India, like this. Hope you understand this, a connection object, how to create a SQL connection class object, then how to retrieve it. This is a sample ADO.NET application I have given you. Then in the next session, I'll be discussing about where to keep the SQL connection or connection strings. What is the best place to keep this connection string? Thank you for watching.